I'm happy to be here. I'd be even happier if I were in Germany, but hopefully that'll happen in the not too distant future. So what we're going to be talking about today is a project that we've been doing on designing feedback systems for markets. And these are systems that are everywhere. I'm going to go through it in a moment. The things that we're showing on this front screen are kind of a tip-off of the direction we're going to go in. In the upper left-hand corner, this rate the overall transaction. This is the way eBay does rating traders, right? So it rates its feedback traders by a 3-point system. I know it's a little more elaborate than that. There's a secondary system as well, but this is the primary method they do ratings by. And then in the lower right-hand corner, the cleanliness, the accuracy check-in, I believe that's from Airbnb. So Airbnb's feedback system is quite different. It asks very detailed kinds of questions. And then in the upper right-hand corner is of course, this is a bit of a joke, but the reason it's funny is it's a kind of an experience that we've all had. We have an overall rating that's pretty good, 4 stars out of 5. And then you read the reviews and it makes you wonder about whether the 4 stars are really deserved. So the point is that these feedback systems to rate trading partners, are all over the place in the way they're designed. The second observation that we need to make to begin with is there's virtually no theory on how to design these systems. There's a lot of data. Data has been collected on these systems. These systems are studied, but we have virtually no theory. And the closest thing to a theory that I've seen was something that Steve Tadelis and a co-author did. They tucked it into a review paper because the theory really didn't go very far. In fact, it's a simple model, but it quickly becomes intractable. We're going to borrow a little piece of that model here, but there's no real accepted model out there to explain what these systems are doing and to give you some guidance on how to design a system. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a very different approach. We're not going to present here a standard model. Rather, we're going to think about the problem in a more engineering way. We're going to think about it in terms of prototyping. So what we're going to present is a prototype here of a market that captures the basic problems that these feedback systems are presented with. And then we're going to look at and use this prototype to explain, to explore some ideas about how these feedback systems should be designed. So that's going to be the basics of what we're going to do. So let me get into it a little more here. Let's see, I got to press here probably. There we go. Okay, so a little history on this. These systems began as a method of regulating trust and trustworthiness in online markets. So when eBay, Amazon appeared, it's Taobao, I believe, in Chinese, and in a few others, when they appeared, they were fully online markets. And these online markets were geographically, the traders were quite dispersed. So even within a country, say for instance in the US, if somebody in California is trading with somebody in New York, and one side of the trade thinks they got cheated, there isn't a hell of a lot they can do, because California law and New York law don't intersect well, and there isn't much recourse. So trust is really important in these markets. And so eBay came up with this system that they have as a way of trying to regulate trade. You can identify a bad trader, and therefore people won't trade with them anymore. You identify good traders, people should want to trade with them. And so it started that way. There was a great deal of skepticism, by the way, when these markets started, that these kinds of reputation systems were going to work. But there's a lot of data to show now that, at least on a basic level, they do work. So traders that maintain a good reputation find it easier to find trading partners, and they also tend to get higher prices. So on that basic level, these systems work pretty well. Although I'm going to show you in a moment, and there's a lot of literature on this, there's no shortage of problems as well with the systems. The history of it is these systems were successful enough that they have spread to all kinds of other kinds of transactions that happen among people offline, right? So Uber, Airbnb, doctor's visits, you name it. Just about everything gets rated now. I always, every time I give this talk, I have a new anecdote to press home the point. So my child graduated from high school finally. He is a person who needed a lot of incentive. So what we did is, at the time, we told him, we'll buy you a car if you graduate high school. So he graduated high school, so we owe him a car. I must tell you, it is an awful time. I suspect it is the same in Europe as it is here. It is an awful time to buy a car. Not only is it very expensive, because car makers don't have enough computer chips to keep up with demand, I quickly discovered you're not buying a car when you go to a car dealership. What you're buying is a car future. They don't have the car. You basically are buying it sight unseen, and then you hang around for a month waiting for it to show up. So it shows up, and we go in, and the salesperson at one point turns to us and said, in a week, you are going to get a request to rate me on a 10-point system scale. And he said, I must tell you that if you give me anything less than a 10, I will have problems. They will come back to give me grief, right? So these systems have traveled far and wide, and they've had a big effect on trading and trading behavior. They might even have more effect in the future. So I gave this talk a while ago, and Matthias Sutter was in the audience, and he pointed out that he and a bunch of co-authors have been studying credence good markets. So these are markets where you go to the doctor says you've got this problem. You don't feel like you're sick, but doctor thinks you have this problem and you must do something about it right away. And you do something right away. Doctor says you will be fine now. The thing is, you don't know whether you had the problem before you had the procedure, and you still don't know after the procedure, right? So how do you regulate these markets? And Matthias has got and co-authors have some discussion in their papers about how you might go about doing this using a rating system in people's experiences. So there's a lot more. So these systems have traveled far and wide, and there's more room to run. Now, in some ways, these systems are old, very, very old. This is a quote from one of my favorite papers about this kind of tit-for-tat trust systems by Evner Greif, and about ancient traders trading across the Mediterranean when trading across the Mediterranean was treacherous because boats weren't as good, and knowledge of how to sail weren't as good. And you had to have a partner to do it. If you made the pottery in say, Northern Africa, and you shipped it to Europe, you needed a partner in Europe to sell the stuff. And so there was a trust issue there. Your partner says, we had a bad month, send you less money than you expected. Can you be sure it's because we had a bad month or because your trader partner had extra personal expenses? And the way this worked was basically that if somebody on the European side, in this case, observed that you were being cheated, they could write a letter, right? Or if you discovered you were being cheated, you could write a letter, and you circulated this letter among other traders. It's a very similar kind of system. I just want you to let you know that if you're dealing with Joe cheat me, right? And that, of course, would discourage other people from dealing with Joe and give Joe an incentive in the first place not to disappoint. So in this sense, these systems are very old. I told this story to a manager at eBay. So a few years ago, Axel Okenfels, Ben Greiner, myself, we did some work for eBay, which we subsequently reported in a paper that was published in Management Science. And so I related this, we visited there and I related this story to a manager. And here is the manager's response. He says, it's a good story. He said, but the difference with the new systems is that the difference from the old systems is in the old systems, you told your friends about your experience. In the new systems, you tell the world. Right? So this is a difference, and this is a critical difference between these systems. Arguably, they're much more powerful than the old way of doing things, where things used to circulate, reputations used to circulate by word of mouth, friend to friend. You now tell the world. So it's important, and probably more important than ever, that you get the information right. Bird's eye view of how these systems work. So basically, this is what you're looking at is basically the way all these systems work at least they all work the same at a bird's eye level. So what happens is there's a trade in the market and a feedback gets submitted to the feedback rating system through some kind of elicitation method. That's going to be our focus here. We're going to focus on the elicitation end of it. After elicitation, it goes into some kind of aggregation procedure. The vast majority of these systems aggregate the data. So the vast majority of these systems ask for some rating on a rating system. And they take the number, you give a rating, say on a 5-point scale, and they take a trader, all the traders' ratings, and they average them. And then they kick out a display for the trader that shows that average score, can show the breakdown in various forms as well, and sometimes allow comments on the trader to be posted as well. So we're going to take that part of the system as fixed in our study. We're going to focus on the elicitation aspect of it, primarily because the system can't be any better than the information that's put into it. That's not to say that the aggregation part of it isn't very interesting, both in terms of how you put these numbers together. The typical way they're done is just averaging. Sometimes there's some limitation on how far back they go in terms of, they only take the last 3 years of scoring, something like this. But usually some sort of direct average. And I hope one of the things you get out of this talk is to begin to wonder whether that's really the right way to do it. But for the moment, we're going to take it as fixed. And then, of course, the aggregation goes back to the market as information for future trades. The big goal of these systems, put very simply, is informing on trader reliability. We want to inform on traders' reliability, and in that way, we give traders an incentive to be reliable. By the way, you can stop me at any moment and ask a question. I'm perfectly fine with that. All right. Now, I mentioned before, even though these systems work on a baseline level, there are well-known problems. And I give you a tour of some of these problems. What you're looking at here is a table of frequency of feedback giving. And it's been broken out by country, and it's also been broken out by whether the trade was fully at home. So US home refers to a trade where both traders were in the United States. And US away refers to a trade where one trader is in the US and the other trader is in another country. So eBay operates in, if I recall correctly, they operate in 36 countries. And you can trade across countries. And you can observe two things here. First of all, a lot of the home trading reporting frequencies are quite high, about 3/4, but not universally. So for example, in India and in Poland, the frequency is quite a bit lower. Secondly, you can see when you run your eye from home to away, you can see that frequencies tend to drop. And we have a paper that Ben Grainer and Axel and I have a paper that was published recently in the Economic Journal that basically studies this phenomenon and shows that it can be attributed to in a group identity effect. So feedback frequency is important in these systems because if they're very low, then you're missing a lot of information about a lot of trades, and that can be a problem. Here's another problem. This is called the J effect. So what is the J effect? J effect goes something like this. You have a rating system, let's say it has five points, 1 through 5, right? Usually intuitively what we think that means is 3 is average. 3 is an average trade, 1 is a very poor trade, 5 is an extraordinarily successful trade. As a matter of fact, the way that the actual reporting goes is quite different. Typically, the mode of the distribution of a trader's observed scores is the mode is 5. So extraordinary is actually the mode of the distribution. The second highest peak is 1, the lowest possible score, and then there's very little in the middle. This is the J effect, right? And this has been observed in a few papers. This isn't, I'm not aware of a paper in the economics literature that directly documents the J effect, but there's a number of them in the computer science literature that show that this is quite a general phenomenon. And then that raises the issue about why there's a J effect. Well, the work that Axel, Ben, and I did for eBay had to do with this effect. So what we looked at is we looked at strategic aspects of strategic reasons for why there might be such an effect. And so what you're looking at here, this is actual data from eBay ratings. And these green dots, all these green dots on the screen are trades where both the buyer and the seller said they were very happy. So eBay has a two-way trading system. Both the buyer and the seller do ratings. And green means both of them rated the other trader positive. Blue means one trader said they were happy. Whoops, I've got to be careful here. Sorry about that. Blue means one trader was happy and the other trader was not. And then red means both reported they were unhappy. And I want you to notice that the red is all along the 45-degree diagonal, almost all of it, and with just a slight bias downward. So this is what you see here is almost all the both unhappy trades happen in the following way. Is the buyer first gives the seller a negative rating, and the seller then responds with a negative rating. Importantly, the seller was able to see that they got a negative rating at the time. And you can see that it was a response. One of the things that we did for this study is we surveyed sellers and asked them, do they do this because they got a negative rating from the buyer? And quite a few sellers were quite candid. It's like, hell yeah, that's the way I did it. The reason I did it, I didn't deserve a negative rating. This guy gave me a negative rating, so I gave him one right back, called retaliation. Right? So a lot of what we did in this study is try to redesign the system to work the retaliation out. And that largely came down to designing a system where one side could not see what the other side had given them. It's actually it's not as simple as that, it turns out, but that was the basic idea. And it worked pretty well. We were able to show in the paper that after the redesign, and we took the incentive for retaliation, we dampened it down, that you got a lot less of this kind of activity. The reason retaliation is very bad for this system, you might look at it and say, well, it's very little of the data, is in the survey we did, we asked traders, have you ever been retaliated against? And it is a small phenomenon, so most traders said no. And then we asked traders, did you ever not give feedback because of fear of retaliation? And a very large majority said yes. So it's has a chilling effect on the system. So we took that out of the system. But I must tell you, even after we took it out of the system, there was still a fair amount of this J effect. It didn't do away with it totally. Whoop, wrong way. I'm going to skip. This is more evidence on the strategic aspect of it, but I skip this for now. So there's a strategic aspect to the J effect, but there appears to be more to going on. And this is a paper I did with David and Johannes Mons, and what we did is we looked at the possibility that there's a leniency effect in the ratings. So if in the labor literature where employers rate their employees, a lot of companies have a formal process. There's known to be a leniency problem in the rating systems. And we show that something is similar happens here. So and that has to do with the uncertainty of attribution for a trade that's gone bad. So if you get something late, it could be if you were expecting it to arrive on Friday, but it didn't get to you until a few days later than that, there are two possibilities. One is that the trader did not put it in the mail right away. Your partner trader didn't put it in the mail right away. The other possibility is the postal service messed it up. Right? And so there's wiggle room here in terms of attribution. And we show that kind of wiggle room actually tends to inflate feedback scores. Right? So people give a trader observes what they got, they're disappointed, but they tend to give the other trader a benefit of a doubt if you give them a small excuse, if you give them some uncertainty in the trade. So there's a leniency effect. And the problem with the leniency effect, of course, is it makes everybody look great, right? You have a handful of people who are really horrible, that people don't, and these people do get chased out of the market, by the way. But then you've got all these people walking around with fives, right? And this does give the market platforms a problem. Everybody looks great. You might think they're happy with it. They're not, right? My experience is they say, well, the problem is we get complaints. And the complaints are, the rating system said this guy was really, really great. And as a matter of fact, my experience was horrible. And they hear that enough so that they believe there's a problem in the system. So these systems aren't perfect, and they could be a great deal better. But we really don't, in any systematic way, understand these systems. We like guidelines and we're going to focus on the elicitation part. Can't be any better than the information. System can't be any better than the information it collects. So that seems like the rational place to start. We have very few little in the way of guidelines for elicitation questions or the rating scales we should use. What do we want from feedback? We want it to be informative. What does that mean? We want it to be accurate, of course, but we also want it to be relevant for future trades. That goes back to the joke that's on the first slide, right? And we've all had this experience. We see a trade score, and maybe you read the blurb for the traders, right? And the reason the trader gave I read one review of a resort we were thinking to go to, and the review was they gave it 1 star out of 5, and the explanation was it rained that week. Right? This apparently was a problem attributed to the resort. So not a very useful review. So you want it to be accurate, you want it to be relevant information for future trades. Presently, these systems are all over the place. You get elicitation questions that are very general. Rate this transaction. That's essentially eBay's questions. And the nice thing about being general like that is it minimizes the chance of losing relevant information. Right? Rate this transaction. We're open to what might be wrong. On the other end of it is very specific questions. And as I mentioned, Airbnb does this. This is put in a different context. Was the delivered item as described? It's a very narrow question, but it has the potential advantage of making the basis of the score very, very transparent. And it asks the scorer very specifically to focus on one aspect of the trade. And then in terms of scoring scales, it's all over the place. eBay uses 3 points. A lot of places use 5 points. There are places that use 10 points. Smaller ranges make interpretation arguably easier. If it's a 3-point scale, it's low, average. Well, I put it here, negative, neutral, positive, low, average, high. And then the larger scales may be a little more ambiguous, but they allow for more nuance potentially, right? So how should you go about this? How should you think about what you're doing when you're designing one of these systems in terms of elicitation? What kind of questions should you be asking? And what kind of scaling should you be looking at? We're not going to look here at the verbal aspect of it. I think most of us, our experience is first of all, the numbers are always the headline part of a trader's feedback. Those are the numbers that get pushed forward. And you know, I read sometimes the feedbacks, the narratives that traders leave, and sometimes I don't. So the overall, I think overall the important thing is the numbers. And we're just going to set aside for the moment the comment part of what traders leave. Got to start somewhere. So as I said, what is our approach going to be here? We're going to put together a stylized prototype market. So what we designed is a general market that has a reliability problem in it for one side of the market, the sellers in this case. And then we're going to ask buyers to rate those sellers. And we're going to study the market in 2 ways, right? So first of all, we're going to analyze how a system, we're going to propose a couple of different systems, and we're going to analyze how those systems could work, right? Using certain tools. And then we're going to actually collect data in these markets and see how they actually work. So this is the idea. So this is a little different. Usually you use an experiment. We have a theory that was created outside of the laboratory, and then we collect data to test that theory. In this instance, we have no theory. And you might argue, well, we should wait for a theory. Well, these markets have been, these systems have been around for more than 20 years, and we still don't have any theory. So we need some kind of guidance. So this is the idea. So we're going to take a more engineering kind of approach. We're going to develop a prototype, and we're going to study the prototype, both in terms conceptually and then in terms of the data that we get. Right? We put the prototype together with 2 criteria in mind. One is to capture an elementary reliability problem. Right? This is going to be on the sell side. And the other is we need a clear statistical benchmark for what it means for the system to be informative. This is one of the things that really motivated this project in my mind, is we didn't even have a clear, I've written several papers on these systems, and I've always been very conscious of the fact that we don't really have a clear idea of what it means for the system to be informative. And I think one of the major contributions of this paper is to lay down a clearer idea. So here's what our market is going to look like. So market unfolds in stages. Each stage, there's a potential trade. So we match a seller. The sellers will have types A, B, and C, and they will differ by reliability. I'll show you in a moment. And we're going to randomly match them with buyers. Right? What can the buyers see? First of all, the robots are going to be, or the sellers are going to be robots. And I'll explain that in a moment. And the buyers are going to be humans, and they're going to be doing make both the decision about whether to buy, as well as what kind of, if they do buy, they receive a good, and they can put in a rating into the system, right? So first of all, once they're matched, the buyer will be able to see the seller's existing rating. It'll be an average of their scores that they've gotten so far, and put in a price bid, right? And we're going to use a BDM mechanism for this because this is basically for technical reasons. And what we were looking to do is elicit the buyer's highest willingness to pay. And so we work it that way. And then once the buyer puts in their price into the mechanism, a price is actually drawn randomly, right? So this gives the buyer an incentive to reveal their willingness to pay. And based on the result, there's a transaction or not. If there is a transaction, the buyer receives a good of a particular quality, right? The quality will be of 5 levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. The quality of a higher level has higher value to the buyer, right? So the buyer sees what quality they received, and based on that, they can give a feedback to the seller. And once that's done, the buyer's payoff is equal to quality. The higher quality, better. Quality divided by 100 times whatever valuation they had for the good. So one way to think of it is if they get full quality, a quality of 5, they get their full valuation. If they get quality of 1, they get only a very small part. And then there's 2, 3, and 4 in between. And subtract the price, and that's what they get. If the buyer doesn't get a chance to trade, nothing lost, nothing gained. So let me show you who the buyers are human beings, and we model the seller as robots. And so the seller produces a high quality product with some probability beta and a lower probability with probability 1 minus beta. This is the way Bar Isaac and Tadelis modeled it. So we're borrowing this from the way they proceeded. So this is the way they thought of the problem. They said, well, what you have here is you have a selection problem, and they modeled it in this simple way. Is the selection problem really comes down to beta. A good seller is somebody who has a higher beta, right? And we're gonna do a version of this model. We're going to borrow this basically to model our sellers. We are going to put aside, so our problem is we're going to look at is a selection problem. An important point is later on, and something we intend to do, is go back and also allow there to be moral hazard. There won't be in this case, but in our present study. But it does allow us later to go back and put a moral hazard element in. So the way Tadelis and Bar Isaac and Tadelis did this is they gave the sellers some control over the size of beta, right? They can put effort in, and effort will increase the size of beta or decrease it. So here are our sellers. So in our model, we have three types of sellers, A, B, and C. Seller A tends to deliver bad quality, right? Low quality, quality of 1. And that's the mode. And high quality, a quality of 5 at a lower level. Type B is more of the average seller, and it tends to the modal quality delivered there is 3. And type C is the good seller, and the good seller tends to deliver or the modal quality delivered by the good seller is 5, right? So these are 3 sellers. Why do we use robots? Well, we want to control, and so the idea here is we're putting together a system where buyers are going to rate these sellers, and then we're going to look at how long it takes them to figure out, how long it takes the feedback system to figure out who is who, right? This is the idea. So at the beginning of the game, at the beginning of the market, the only thing a buyer knows is 1/3 of the sellers in the market are type A, 1/3 B, 1/3 C. And then as the game progresses, each seller has a feedback score, and that should be informative about which type that seller is, right? More formally, I'll get in a moment to more formally how we're going to look at how much information that is in the feedback system. We're going to run an experiment where we're going to study the elicitation question asked, as well as the metric, the number of the scale of the feedback system. So we're going to ask either a very general question, rate this transaction, or a very specific question, rate the quality received. And we'll look at it on a 3-point metric, which is simple, and a 5-point metric, which has been designed because it captures the 5 quality levels that are out there. And we're going to look at it 2x2 design. We're going to mix and we're going to match, right? So we have a general elicitation question and a very specific one, but we also have a very simple metric, as well as a metric that's designed and customized to the quality problem we have. Now, you may have very strong opinions right now about which one is the best system. I ask you to withhold your judgment for a moment, because this is going to be one of the surprises in the analysis. How are we going to figure out what an informative system is, right? We're going to judge the informative in the system by looking at the entropy in the system. So the less entropy there is in the system, the more informative the system is. Actually, we're going to look at a version of entropy. We're going to look at relative entropy. This is primarily for convenience. And so the higher relative entropy is, the more informative the system is. So at the beginning of the system, so here is the entropy measure we're going to use is the relative entropy measure down here. At the beginning of the system, there's very little information because no seller has a rating yet. And it's completely at random, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, high, medium, low seller, right? As the system develops, what we hope to happen is that the probability associated with each seller being of a specific type changes, right? Ideally, you never quite get there. You know that the seller is of type A with probability 1, and type B and C with probability 0, right? That's the ideal. You don't ever quite get there, but that's what you hope the information does for you. So we use entropy to judge the informativeness of the system. And let's go back, and this is the first step in the study, is we're going to look back and see what could happen and how this system could work if things go right, right? So this is you're looking at the part of the system we're going to look at is basically the message space. We're changing the elicitation question as well as the scaling, right? And if you start thinking about it, you realize that what you're doing is that the buyer, what each buyer does when they give a score, is effectively they're creating a map between the scores and the seller type. I gave this seller a 1, why? Because I believe they're of a certain type, right? So you can think of the problem here. You begin to think of the problem that the system is presented with is creating a map between type, between score, and between seller type. And what information do you have to create this map? The only thing you see is the quality you've received, right? As well as the seller's old score, right? So here is one map that you could use for the 5-point system. I'm creating things before I want to here. For the 5-point system, there's a very simple and natural map. And the map is that if I receive a quality of 1, I give a score of 1. Actually, you receive a quality. You don't literally receive a quality of 1. You receive a quality of 20%. You give a score of 1. If I receive a quality of 40%, I give a score of 2, so on and so forth, right? So there's a one-to-one link between the quality I received and the score that I give, right? That's one way of doing it. Now, what will you do if you have a 3-point system? Well, it's a harder choice here because a 3-point system, you have to make a decision. Here's a natural way of doing it. If I get the lowest quality, I give a score of 1. If I get the next 3, I give a score of 2. Next 3 quality levels, I give a score of 2. And if I get the highest quality level, I get a score of 3. But there are other ways of doing it as well. You do it like this, right? The 2 lowest qualities levels get a score of 1. The middle gets a score of 2. And the other 2 give score the higher 2 get a 2. And there's yet other ways of doing it, right?
One question, Gary.
Go ahead.
Shouldn't that map depend on the reputation that I observe before giving my rating? So you give the story that people just rate what they see, but a Bayesian would take the reputation that he already seen, see the product quality, make an update and say, okay, what is the most likely type that I'm dealing with, right?
Yeah. So that is another reason we put, so there were 2 motives for putting the 3-score system out there. One was that it's very simple, but the other is that you could also interpret the system as saying, what I'm trying to guess is what kind of seller I'm dealing with, right? So this is kind of the Bayesian updating story, is that I do my Bayesian, I look at the feedback score I've gotten, I do my Bayesian updating, and then I put down the most likely, right? The most likely, so the Bayesian updating says the most likely seller I'm dealing with is seller B. And so I give them a 2, yeah? So it allows that kind of thing, right?
I was just like that kind of mathematically what you put here on the slide, the mapping should depend on 2 things, right? Yeah. The score and the thing, but okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So now, but what you can see so here's going to be the argument. I'll show you the next slide. Here's the big slide. So we took each one of these mapping systems, right? We took each one of these mapping systems. We assumed for the moment that all traders in the market are using one of these. So all traders are using M5, or all traders are using M3A, so on, right? And we looked at the informativeness of the system in theory. The informativeness changes as people are matched and observe what they get, right? So we ran a series of simulations, and here it is. Here's how it falls out. This over here, you're looking at entropy. Over here, you're looking at expected profits. So left is entropy, right is expected profits. And not surprisingly, the M5 system does best, right? This is entropy gets better. It's a 60-round market. And so entropy goes up, relative entropy, that is, goes up as the market proceeds. And it has the best performance, right? But the surprise is most of the other mappings perform very well too, with the exception of this one down here. I believe this is MD3. I can't, problem is I run my cursor over the slide and change the slide. Okay, so most of the systems perform quite well, as long as you assume everybody's using the same map. Right, so this is one of the ahas that comes out of here. It's not so important which map you use. It's important that everybody's using the same map, right? And that translates into expected profits as well, right? You get a similar effect there. So then this kind of changed our thinking about what we're doing here, because we thought when we put it down is it's obvious the 5-point map is going to be much better. And the answer is it isn't obvious, at least if you assume that everybody's coordinating on the same map. So we ran the market, and here are the results we get in a nutshell. So what you can see here is this is R5Q. What is this? This is a 5-point rating system where we ask them to rate the quality. And you can see that this is the aggregated feedback ratings. And you can see here that you get a very clear separation. This is what, this is separated by type. This is A type, B type, C type. I can't use that. I should stop it. Okay. If you go to R5U, what is this? 5-point rating, but we said rate this transaction. There's still some separation. This is down here in the lower left-hand corner. There's some separation, but it's not as clear. If you go to the 3, you get even less clarity. If you go to the 3 scale, you get even less clarity. Yeah? Here's another way of looking at it. R5Q, 5-point, 5-point system, quality. If you go down that column, you can see the clarity of most. If traders get 20%, overwhelmingly, they give it a score of 1. 40% overwhelmingly give it a score of 2, so on and so forth. If you then move across columns, right, you go across this first row, you see that it gets less clear. The coordination, there's less coordination as you move from left to right.
So this is, in a sense, if I think about it, a very negative result, right? So that basically tells me if I want to design a reputation system, then I'll have to anticipate the different levels of quality that I will get on my platform.
I don't think
I cannot bunch information.
I understand why your reaction at first is very pessimistic. I will try to make you a little more optimistic as we talk a little more. Right? Because I mean, this is the key thing. The key thing is you got to get people to coordinate. And of course, in our system, it's not very hard to coordinate because what's being traded and the quality are quite clear. Right? Although even here, even when it is quite clear, it's pretty easy to mess it up, right? You can give it the wrong scale, or all I have to do is ask the wrong question. So statistically, there's a difference going from R5Q to R5U, only difference is the question. And that actually is statistically different, right? You lose informativeness from that. Okay, so here is the actual entropy in the system. And so you can see it has a 95% confidence bounds around it. And you can see that it makes a big difference even in our study where things are clear. They ask the right questions, use the right metric. So if you look at it, after 20 rounds, that's a third of the market has run. The entropy for R5U is at a level that is achieved by these other systems, not for the next highest system doesn't achieve that level until another 20 rounds. Right? That's a huge difference. The informativeness achieved by R5Q after 20 rounds is as good as any other system achieves after 40 rounds. Okay. Now, what we want to do is what we dug into in the rest of the studies. We look at the individual's behavior, right? So what prevents what messes up informativeness in the system, right? Well, lack of coordination messes up informativeness in the system. Another thing that messes up informativeness in the system is people rating on the basis of profit. Now, if you think about it, profit isn't in the control of the seller completely. The seller advances the quality. Greater quality will create greater profit, but profit also depends on the valuation that the buyer has for the item. And valuation differed by buyers in our study, right? And people are using a rating on profit. They rate on profit more if you say rate the transaction than you say rate the quality. Although even when we say rate the quality, some of them rate on profit, right? We can show that. The other thing they tend to rate on is feedback score. And so that the feedback score tends to have a certain biasing effect. So in particular, if you have a very high feedback score and the seller gave a very low quality, there tends to be a disappointment effect there, and it has an effect on people. That's all I'm going to say about it now. We ran a very fancy model, Markov model, to look at feedback, rating, profit versus quality rules, and here were the big results. First of all, the initial rating rules explain a significant amount of difference in the informativeness. It's important to get off to a really good start, and that's one of the reasons R5Q does so well. It orientates people from the get-go, and the differences in informative rate quality versus rate transaction, right? Users do switch what mapping they appear to be using while they are playing, and the switch does tend to be into the direction of rate quality, right? It's just that asking the right questions and having the right metric gets them there quicker. So applied principles of design here. Questions directed at reliability issues work better than general elicitation. The rating metrics should be tailored to what is being measured here. In our study, it's 5 points worked, right? Other issues are going to require more work in order to get a clear rating. And I think that was what your point was, your pessimism that you praised. But again, what it does is it gets you thinking about how can I make it clearer what the rating system should be, right? One way, for some questions, it's simple. If you ask a yes or no question, then you ask it on a 2-point system, right? Yes or no, and you probably label it yes or no to make it even clearer if you want, right? I have had systems where they ask a yes or no answer, and the answer they ask a yes or no question, and they present you with more than a 2-point rating system, right? They're causing problems for themselves. Alternatively, labels, you can put labels to things to try to make it clearer. So you can see some of this on the web already. Clothing, for example, a question that asks about clothing is, did the size match your expectation, right? And you put small, right size, large size, right? So you can use different. It gets you thinking about what kind of tricks you can use to make the meaning of the labels clearer. And generally, you want to ask questions that are more objective in standards than subjective, right? Because objective usually has greater clarity. I'll give you an example in a moment here. Another thing that you can do with this system is use it as a tool for design. And for example, one of the exercises we've got in the paper is we say, well, suppose we break down each of these 3 types into 2 types, so that we have 6 types of traders. So within type 1, we identify a low type 1 and a high type 1, 50-50%. And we could do this. You can then run the system, and you can say, what if we make this additional distinction? Can we improve the informativeness of the system? We can use our entropy tool to see how much difference it would make. Here, of course, the natural thing would be to use a 6-point metric system. Is it worth the trouble? It adds complexity to the system. At the same time, it might add informativeness. So you have a tool in order to evaluate these things. And finally, a hypothesis for the J effect leniency, right? Potential cure. We could design the feedback system to focus on traders on what was received, as opposed to what traders, as opposed to the trader being rated, right? So it's a plea for basically making it more objective. A system that does this quite well now is Airbnb, right? Airbnb, if you ask generalized questions, there are papers on this. You ask generalized questions, rate your host, you get a big leniency effect. If you ask about the cleanliness of the place, you get a more reasonable dispersion of answers, right? If you ask about specifics and objective specifics, you move people. My interpretation, this is what the hypothesis is you move the question away from whether this was a nice guy I was dealing with. All right, he screwed up, but he was a nice guy, right? You change the conversation from when he was a nice guy to whether or not you got something, you physically got something that was up to your expectation. And that's everything I have.
Gary, thanks a lot. It was always fun to listen to you. Very interesting talk. Are there any questions?
I have a remark. It's not a question.
Please.
Or an idea. I don't know. So for me, the main epiphany in your talk was that coordination matters. I mean, it's clear once you see it, but you have to see it. But if coordination matters, how about the following? Why don't educate people on your platform how to rate? So everyone who wants to become a professional rater will receive a voucher for taking a training where you tell them what is the rating system and how to interpret it. And then you can separate ratings into these are ratings given by trained raters and those are ratings are given by untrained raters.
I agree with you 100%. That goes back to the because one of the things this gets you thinking about is why are we aggregating all of these people, right? Among other things, we have, I love your idea that we actually train them and then we identify them that way. The other way to identify them, we've got oodles of data on how people rate. And we could use that to figure out, to sort out, statistically sort out who the good raters are and who the good raters are in terms of prediction of happiness in the future versus who the raters who are unreliable are. And then you put more weight on them in the feedback system. But I like your version of it a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or you try to.
That's the big aha in the paper.
Or you try to reverse engineer the matrices for everyone, and then try to aggregate them. But that might be complicated, huh?
Yeah, Mike.
Let me ask a question. So here you find that the 5-point scale basically improves the results, and I would assume that if you allow for an even larger matrix, it could further improve the results from a theory perspective. However, from a applied perspective, or however you want to call it, you increase the coordination problem.
Yeah, I think that's and here is where I agree with you. The system presents trade-offs, largely because of the behavioral aspect that's involved here, right? Traders, we're dealing with people. If we make it too complicated, we put too much in front of them, they're probably going to screw up the coordination, right? And so the first way you can look at this is we have a tool here, an entropy tool, and it's that we can use for simulations to discover how much the potential gain is from complicating the system. And then the question is going to be, how much do we lose because we have to deal with human beings and they're going to make mistakes, right? In there, I think that's where you use the laboratory aspect of it, right? Is we can put it in front of people and we can see just how bad it is, right, in terms of mistakes.
If I get it right, the different qualities I receive are not all equally informative. So is there, but we still aggregate. Is there some kind of an idea to let's say emphasize very low or very high quality reports, because that would makes the signal more informative overall?
Yeah, in short, there's some of the analysis we've been doing recently does suggest that certain ratings are more informative than others, right? And there again, I got to be a little tentative. We're not quite done with it, so I don't want to say too much. But there is definitely a suggestion that this is true. And then you go back to and that's what gets you thinking about playing with the aggregation procedure, right? Is that certain messages being sent to the system are known to be more reliable than others. And you can use pretty straightforward Bayesian updating techniques, a weighted Bayesian updating technique to put into the system. Now, the caveat there is that it may cause issues with you may have to do more to explain this to because buyers are no longer looking at just averages, right? So now you're going to have to explain how it's done. Now, my own inclination is if it works better, they won't ask too many questions. They won't be suspicious. But I put this in front of a couple of other people who don't agree. But it does get you thinking down these lines.
Great.
Oh, speaking of people who don't agree, hi, Axel.
Hi, Gary. Good to see you.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, hopefully I see you next year in person in Cologne. So I have a question. So as always, wonderful talk, super topic, of course, we have worked on this. I was just wondering, these feedback systems, one task of those is to provide, lots of information. So informativeness is important. But the other task is to create incentives for good behavior. And I'm just wondering whether, what is good for coordination is also good for incentives, which is not so clear to me because, for incentives, it might be enough to have only one feedback, right? Thumbs down or something like this, right? So that you really have an incentive to, deliver good quality. And once there's a thumb down, say, or some kind of negative feedback, you're basically out. So I guess this will depend very much on context, but I guess I can, produce contexts in which, what is good for coordination might not be so good for the incentive part of the feedback system.
So are you concerned about where I have some control over how many ratings I get, or I have some?
Well, again, it's not just about informativeness, right? So it might be that from an incentive point of view, so from a coordination point of view, right? So what maximizes informativeness is, lots of feedback maybe. But from an incentive point of view, you really don't want to distinguish maybe between, very good and, not so good sellers. You just want to distinguish between, very good sellers and everybody else, so that you create an incentive for being very good.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I hadn't thought about this. But potentially, well, see, my first response to it is potentially you could build, well, I don't know, actually. I understand exactly what you're saying. It's a good point.
There is certainly a trade-off. I mean, I was thinking about that when you were presenting that. So how about sellers' behavior in a repeated game? And here, the way I was thinking about that is what incentives does the system provide to first build a reputation and then to milk it, right? So in a way that you do a couple of good trades, then you become a good seller, and then you like screw over 10 buyers, and it doesn't affect your reputation that much because it averages out. So that would be kind of an interesting next question to look at seller behavior. And I think that was Axel was saying, right?
Yeah, I think so. Building seller behavior in, yeah, I agree. This is so we use robots in the first case because it was very clear how to judge the informativeness of the system, right? You have this selection, but if you open it up and you allow seller behavior to move, in principle, you should be able to do the same thing, but it becomes stickier in terms of measuring the informativeness. It becomes stickier because you've got to put priors into the system, right? And of course, those priors are going to have to account for not just how people initially deliver quality, but also how they may change over time in the learning involved. In principle, you can do that, but it is trickier.
It's super tricky if you think about all this repeated games literature with some uncertainty about types that can have very, very perverse effects, that kind of rational types hide behind irrational types, good types hide behind bad types, and then strategies can differ widely even for small probabilities of types. So this becomes very complicated. But that would be interesting.
Yeah, the data we've collected in the lab suggests types, and it suggests also there's a certain amount of type changing, right? So people learn things in the system, and they can change the kind of behavior that they exhibit. Some people learn to be nice, other people learn to be sneaky, and you gotta sort that out. So I agree that's a big issue, but I think at least in principle you could start typing